Town Council special meeting and budget meeting to order, 6:30 PM Tuesday, March 16th. Ms. Milton, roll call, please.
Mr. Orris,
Here.
Mr. Slocum,
Here.
Mr. Burway,
Present.
Mr. Jenks.
Here.
Ms. Nichols,
Here.
Ms. Cavano,
Here.
Mr. Talbot,
Here.
Mr. Veliver, Mr. Walsh.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Milton. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
Allegiance
to the
flag
flag
of the United States of
of the
America,
United States of
to the
America,
republic
to the republic
for
for
which
which
it
stands
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and
and
justice
justice for all.
Renzo. Renzo, whose Bauer hat is this? David's?
Okay, the first item on our agenda is discussion and possible action regarding tax appeal stipulated agreements with Rite Aid. We also have another one with Arby's. Both have the potential for executive session. We will be going into executive session to discuss both. So I'd like to entertain a motion to go into executive session for both of these matters, to include our town manager, our assistant town manager, our appraiser, Mr. Modio, I believe is here, our town attorney, and our finance director, Mr. Jascott. Anyone else?
So
Sean?
moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Mr. Slocum. Second. Thank you, Mr. Veliver. Did I miss anybody, Sean?
I think that's it. Nope.
Okay, with that, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Okay, let us know when we're in executive session. regarding the tax appeal stipulated agreements with Rite Aid. Mr. Barry?
All right, Mr. Chairman, I have resolutions authorizing the execution of the tax appeal stipulated agreement. They are numbered last week's numbers, but the motions are correct, I believe. So if not, Sean or Arnett will correct me. But be resolved that the town council approves resolution 030921-12. Be resolved, town council hereby authorizes the execution of a tax appeal stipulated agreement by and between the town of Cheshire and Rite Aid of Connecticut, Inc., properties at 922 South Main Street and 180 Main Street. And be it further resolved that the town attorney is authorized and directed to execute on behalf of the town said agreements in the form and upon the terms and conditions as presented at this meeting.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Mr. Barry?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, these are in the normal course of town after revaluation of 2018 that we do get a handful of appeals that work their way through the court system and appeal system. And this is one that does take into account the value of the property compared to other like-kind type properties and our attempt to have the value a little bit higher than what was agreeable with the property owner, and we've come to an agreement, and I'm presenting this for the council's consideration. I do intend to support it. I think it does have a basis in fact and in value from our experts that this is a reasonable value to put on these properties, and therefore I urge their adoption.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Any questions or comments from members of the council? Seeing none, with that, I'll call for a vote. Actually, before I do, I just want to make a quick comment. I will support this as well. I'm going to do it a bit reluctantly. I am a little bit concerned about where we're going with some of the settlements in terms of our grand list and these property values. Although after, long deliberation with our consultants and our professionals, I do think that we run more risk if we pursue this further in the court system. But I am a bit concerned about it, and I want the public to know that the council is looking at these very closely and making the best decisions we can for our community to ensure that we're being fair for all of our taxpayers in the community, but also making sure that we're appropriately paid relative to our grand list and our taxes. So with that, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item 4, discussion and possible action regarding tax appeal stipulated agreement with Arby's. Mr. Barry?
Mr. Chairman, be resolved that the town council approves resolution 030921-13. Be resolved that the town council hereby authorizes the execution of tax appeal stipulated agreements by and between the town of Cheshire and WTB Realty LLC for property at 980 South Main Street. And be it further resolved that the town attorney is authorized and directed to execute on behalf of the town said agreements in the form and upon the terms and conditions as presented at this meeting.
Second.
Barry, second, Mr. Slocum. Mr. Barry?
Mr. Chairman, I think this one is also a reasonable, parties could say it's a reasonable agreement to disputed property value. Always something that we have a risk if we were to go forward. We have an expense if we were to go forward. And I think this is a reasonable course of action for us to take on behalf of our town's grand list and value and tax revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Any questions or comments from members of the council? Seeing none, with that, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item 5, proposed fiscal year 21-22 operating budget. To discuss our general overview, summary of expenditures, revenue projections, mill rate review, debt service, CNR, CEP, employee benefits, general services, and administration and finance. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our town manager, Mr. Kimball.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll start before I share my screen with, first of all, just welcoming everyone to the fiscal 22 budget development process. And as the council is well aware, but for anyone watching at home, we're going to have a series of upcoming budget workshops, really the first being tonight. And as the chairman just indicated, I'll be presenting an overview, a general overview of significant portions of the budget, mill rate, revenues, debt service, and the like. If we have time, this is also the scheduled night for a discussion on employee benefits, general services, and the administration and finance departments. Again, I think bearing in mind the time, if we don't have time to cover all of those, we can certainly move some of those to another workshop. That's not uncommon. So just before I share my screen, and just for the council with their budget books at home, so let me hold this up here. You should have 2 budget books in front of you. These are all available on our website for anyone watching from home. We have, as we refer to them, you'll see the what we call the summary budget. This is the vertical page. There you go. It's got the gray binding, and it used to be called the small book. It is now 326 pages long because it includes the capital budget, because we now are presenting both of those at the same time. It is actually just a little bit thicker than the detail book, which is how we'll refer to the other one with the black binding. So I know, as we're unfortunately still in this Zoom format, we'll be consulting back and forth to the 2 books and referencing page numbers. I will try to do my best to refer to the summary document, summary budget, and the detail budget. And certainly when we're in capital, that's all going to be in the vertical document under the capital tab. So with that, if you'll just give me a second, I will get my PowerPoint shared. Let's see if I can do this here. Screen. Okay, and now I have to share it. All right, hopefully that worked. Can everyone see the?
That's good,
PowerPoint
Sean.
screen? Okay. All right, so I will dive right in. This should take about 15 or 20 minutes, and then I know we'll have some discussion after. So just to present, and as a reminder, this is the fiscal 21-22 budget. Focus on the operating budget for tonight, although there will be some slides on the capital budget, but not in great detail, as we'll certainly be taking those up with both the departments and also later on into April, certainly with the capital budget overview. Now, let's see my slide. There we go. So a overview of the operating budget. The total proposed general fund budget is $121,577,417. Overall, this represents an increase in the operating budget of $5.3 million, $5,314,000, as you'll see here, or a 4.57% expenditure increase. The general government component, which is all of the traditional town services, not including education and not including debt service, is an increase of $1.697 million, or 5.15%. The education budget, as proposed and then ultimately approved and forwarded to the council by the Board of Education, is a total of $78,487,052. That's an increase of just about $3.9 million, or 5.22%. Debt service, you'll see, shows as a decrease of $276,330. That's really a function of last year in fiscal 21, if the council will recall. Near the end of the budget process, the council did appropriate and approve $616,000 to be put into the debt service reserve fund. So our actual debt service is $616,000 less than that fiscal 21 figure. So we actually have an increase in our debt service, as we know, because we've been planning for this increase for some time now using debt reserve funds, of about $340,000 underlying this budget here. Capital non-recurring and Arnett, can you, it looks like somebody's in the waiting room. Hopefully you can let them in.
It's Sandy. She's calling in. I'm letting her in.
Okay, great. Sorry. Capital non-recurring appropriation, I've kept the same as in prior years. Well, as in last year. In prior years, we've been a little closer to $1.1 million, but for this proposed budget, I've kept it flat at $1 million. And the contingency budget, historically, we budgeted at $125,000, unchanged. Just going to give a little budget context. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic really starts and stops with that with respect to context. We are actually just about almost to the day 1 year removed from a lot of the onset of the pandemic's impact, including shutdowns of various facilities, and the response, the emergency response that really began just about 12 months ago. Last year, the council, pursuant to the governor's executive order, did delay adoption of the budget in order to, first of all, respond at the local level and try to plan as best we could for the upcoming year, the year we are currently in. As a reminder, last year's budget, the council approved a flat mill rate, no tax increase budget. We did this in a variety of ways, relying on $2 million of fund equity or fund balance, which was supported by the fiscal 20 budget surplus that we did generate at the second half of last year. Cuts to pandemic impacted services, including summer maintenance and camps, pool staffing, and also frozen positions, including the assessor position. We currently have an acting assessor who was formerly the deputy assessor, and also a police officer position in the police department. But Board of Education request, as I said before, is $3.9 million. This is about 74% of the budget increase that you are being presented with tonight. State budget proposal, as we've seen from the governor, we're obviously monitoring closely as they're currently in their session. State aid is effectively flat. You'll see that on an upcoming slide. It's actually lower budget to budget by about $20,000. I did not include in this budget, which we'll talk about later as another consideration, a potential $759,000 increase in our pilot formula. You may be hearing about this a little bit more. You've probably been hearing in recent days about, especially some of the cities are really pushing for a change to the formula for the payment in lieu of taxes program through the state. Cheshire would actually benefit from that program, primarily due to the state prison property, to the tune of about $750,000. So that has passed through part of the legislature, and we're monitoring closely to see and hope that that's going to be in the final budget. Expired union contracts being settled. Just a point there that last year's budget did not include any assumptions for budget increases necessary to fund wages for the current year, any wage increases for the current year. As some of those are settling out, and as the council's discussed, this budget has to account for both increases in the current year as well as the year upcoming, what we're planning for. There we go. Just a little bit of, I guess, more positive news, just because I think in this, over the course of the last year, it's important to take stock of some of the things that have really been going our way through the year. Our local unemployment data continues to be very strong. Most recently, as updated this week, Cheshire is at 5.6% unemployment, which is actually the fifth lowest in the entire state of 169 towns. The statewide average of unemployment is 8.5%. So again, that's been positive to see as our residents hopefully are navigating the economic impacts of the pandemic a little better than some of our peers. Recent town survey data from the SMC, actually as of just last month, but I think some important information to share. 98.5% of respondents reported quality of life is very good or good. 91.3% responded their current standard of living compared with 2 years ago had either improved or there was no movement, but it's good. And 90%, a little over 90% reported positive ratings for town services. So again, I just think the council deserves a lot of credit for this. And again, we've, despite a really challenging year, I think it's nice to still see some of the data reflecting satisfaction with town services and the quality of life here in Cheshire, which we all know and love. Proposed revenues. You'll see here, I'm showing fiscal 20's actual revenues, the current year's adopted, fiscal 21, and the recommended in the upcoming budget. Just to show really year over year, if you look at 21 versus 22, state aid, as I said before, is basically flat, $14.9 million. Other revenues, which you'll see on the next slide, include our departmental revenues. They're up a little bit, about $130,000. Use of fund balance, again, in this upcoming budget is decreased from what we assumed last year. So a lot of that has to be made up by the tax increases that you see and that we'll be discussing tonight, and that of course are subject to change as the council deliberates over this budget. In graphical form, here's the proposed revenues. We remain, as almost every town in Connecticut, very heavily reliant on property taxes as our primary source of revenue to support the operating budget. You'll see the other various sources here. And again, a comparison from really 6 budgets ago, if you will, kind of a 5-year comparison between the fiscal 17 adopted budget and the proposed budget. You'll just see that over time, of course, our property taxes have increased, really because the rest of the revenues haven't. Our pilot is down still from the state, about $800,000. Town departments are up slightly, but roughly flat over where they were before. Grants to the town are down, as well as miscellaneous. Grants to education, also another almost $1 million. And we are still using a little more fund equity than we had traditionally. Again, we do that judiciously and supported through assumptions on the tax collection rate. But again, just a comparison of where we were before and the resulting impact. Some significant budget considerations, and I'm sure this is going to be a topic that we discuss not only tonight, but I think in future meetings as we frankly get more information and also plan for how the anticipated revenues and some reimbursement revenues that we are receiving will affect ultimately the adoption of this budget. The federal American Rescue Plan funding, which I'm sure everyone is hearing a lot about in the recent days, has Cheshire slated for $2.857 million in the schools for $857,000. An interesting additional component of this, and this is really breaking as of really just last week as we're starting to get numbers and some clarity around this, is the New Haven County numbers that are included. I'm still trying to get some more information, but as you know, Connecticut doesn't have traditional county governments. We are told that the $165 million that's slated for New Haven County is coming to Connecticut, and that ultimately what will be we'll be following very closely is how does that get dispersed. We've heard some indication it could be per capita. There are also a number of other, I think, factors to be considered and that will remain to be seen. Ultimately, if we were to get $194 per capita, just for context, that would be about $5.5 million for Cheshire. Again, I think that's an area that we really need to get more clarity about what they're going to do with that funding, because again, unlike many other states, that's not actually going to an organized county government. So more to come on that, I'm sure, in the coming days. Just kind of a little bit of an update and recap on some of the funds that we've just started to receive or that we've been applying for the current year. We have been receiving unemployment compensation under the CARES Act for those positions that we laid off last year. For the current year, for those folks that were unemployed. We do get a 50% reimbursement because the town pays its own unemployment. And so far we've realized about $135,000 there to date. The schools ESSER 1 grant fundings of about $100,000, and also the coronavirus relief fund anticipated around $706,000 that will be coming in the current year. The town coronavirus relief fund grants and a small portion of FEMA that we've received through June 30th of 20, or for costs incurred through June 30th of 20, total $132,000. And then for the remaining 6 months up until December 31st, we've been approved for $234,000. So this will, Jim and I will be discussing in much more detail and with some strategy sessions with the council, some of the assumptions we want to make with respect to these revenues coming in. Additional funding that we are aware are coming is the ESSER 2 funds for education, which is slated at $219,000. That was actually listed in the governor's proposed budget as additional revenue, if you recall, when I forwarded some of the information as we got the governor's budget analysis. We are anticipating a reimbursement from our Storm Isaias FEMA application of about $112,000. I mentioned before the pilot formula change of $759,000, which we'll be monitoring again very closely. Oops. And then just a reminder that in the next couple of weeks, we'll be doing the bond refunding, which has a potential for $500,000 to $600,000 of savings over the remaining life of the bonds, with some flexibility about when we take the savings in the next couple of years. So we'll be discussing that in more detail. Just a quick overview of our fund balance and our projected surplus for the current year. And I know Jim Jascott is on here and he'll jump in if I misstate anything. But just to set a little more context, our available fund balance as of July 1 of 20 was $14.3 million. As I said before, we've appropriated $2.18 million of fund balance for the current budget year. And that leaves an unassigned fund balance of 12.2 million, or 10.92% of expenditures, which again remains pretty significantly above our 9.25% target for our fund balance policy. If you take the current projected revenues and expenditures for the current year, we end up with a result from the current year of about $563,000. Jim, again, you can jump in. I know that as the footnote says, this is the expenditures were partially offset by the $234,000 COVID grant, but a lot of the other revenues I was referencing on the prior page are not necessarily included in some of that activity, correct?
Correct.
And so if our final results from the current year are a surplus of 563,000, we would have a projected fund balance of 12.7 million, of which, again, my current year budget is recommending an appropriation down from the 2.1 million, but still an appropriation of $1 million from fund balance, which would leave us with 11.7 million, or again, 10.13% of expenditures, which again, this last calculation says that's about a little over $1 million above our floor of 9.25% for our fund balance policy. I know there's a lot of information there, and I'm sure we'll go through these in more details, and I'll be happy to share some of these documents too.
John,
go ahead, Rob.
quick question. Sorry to interrupt you, but my mind, while I'm thinking about it, can we get a listing of what's included in terms of revenue in that, I guess the
566.
What
Yeah,
the surplus is.
Sure.
And what isn't, because there was a lot in your prior presentation that's not in there, just so we can have it, because it's going to be important as we go forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we'll want to dedicate some time to kind of talk through all of those, because there are so many things and they're kind of coming fast and furious with respect to those reimbursements and grants. Jim, is there anything you wanted to touch on?
No, you know, just that 566, I know a good chunk of that is that built-in surplus that we usually have in our tax revenues, because we're very conservative in what we use for a collection rate percentage of 99.2%. So I know that part of that, we came in with a 99.65% collection rate. And so I want to say it probably accounts at least for 2/3 of that 566 surplus. But I'll look and see what the rest of that pertains to.
Okay. Now moving on from revenues to expenditures. Again, you'll see here the total town budget, including debt service, Board of Education, and then the town departments. As we're all aware, the Department of Education is certainly the largest portion of the town's budget. Here are the individual numbers by major function area, including all of the general government departments, the contingency amount, debt service at 7.3 million, and the education budget. Some of the major drivers that I just want to touch on here a little bit. Again, we've covered the total increase here is 4.57%, which you'll see in the lower right-hand corner. Kind of cumulatively, if you will, from the top, the Board of Education budget represents, of that 4.57, that's 3.35% of the increase. Debt service, if you don't include that one-time reserve transfer, because I'll include that here at the other changes. Again, the underlying debt service principal and interest is increasing $339,000, which is worth about 0.29% of the overall budget increase. As I said before, contractual salaries and wages really over 2 years for fiscal 21 and fiscal 22 represent an increase of $558,000, or about 0.48% of that overall increase. Town retirement and pension expenses, the council will recall that last year, even though we had 457 or 401k style plans, so as those increase, our retirement expenses also increase in that area, which we'll see as we get through the budget. And then one other item in that $359,000 that we'll be talking about with the public safety budget is a request that came through the volunteer fire department for some changes to their volunteer pension plan. There's a pension program that fire volunteers are part of, and they've had some suggested changes, some requested changes that they want to present to the council. We're still waiting for some actuarial data on some of that, but there is a placeholder in this budget of $100,000 to account for that new actuarially defined increase for some of those requested changes, which I'm sure we'll be talking about further. The restored positions that we had frozen in the current year budget that I've requested be restored to their prior levels. The assessor, or if you will, deputy assessor position, currently being filled by the deputy assessor. The police officer I mentioned before, and the maintenance workers that I have restored to the budget, the summer maintenance staff, totals $274,000, or another 0.24% of the increase. Medical insurance, I know the budget committee is certainly aware, as we had a little presentation the other day. We've historically used the medical trust fund. We've had a healthy fund balance for the last few years, and we've relied on it to kind of smooth the increases in our medical expenses over the past few years. The last 18 months, unfortunately, have really presented with some pretty bad claims experience. And at the same time, you know, the use of the fund balance therefore kind of gets drawn down a little quicker. And so a large part, in fact, almost 50% of the Board of Ed's budget increase, as they will be explaining, is due to increases that they need to fund medical claims. On our side, it's not quite as bad as the Board of Ed side. And in fact, it's gotten a little better in the last 2 months since we started preparing this. But the budget I'm presenting does not include any use of fund balance, medical trust fund balance, as we have in prior years, to the tune of about $250,000 or $310,000 each year. So that's part of the increase here of $240,000 or 0.21% of the increase. Residential solid waste tonnage. This is a kind of a new issue, and it's a pandemic related issue. Last year we faced some changes with respect to the tip fee we pay for residential trash collection due to the closure of the Covanta Wallingford plant. And while there's no increase really with respect to the tip fee, we are seeing, especially over the fall, from really July on into December, a significant, almost 20 to 25% increase in the amount of trash, residential trash, that our residents are throwing away. This is occurring across the country. Really, I think what you're seeing, as we're one of the towns that provide local government funded trash collection, is that folks are home more. They're either working from home, so there's trash that's not going to their place of work, but probably most significantly, they are eating more at home, right? They're not going to restaurant. If they are going to restaurant, which we strongly encourage, and I hope people do, if they're getting their food as takeout and they're bringing it home. So I don't know about you, but I'm certainly experiencing what feels like a much heavier trash barrel every week. And I think that's reflected in the 20% increase we've seen in the tonnage reports every month. Typically, we track about 7,100 tons a year, and we were tracking for a while closer to 8,500 tons. This budget assumes 8,200 tons. So still ends up as an increase in our costs of $137,000. So something I'm sure we'll talk about more in the public works budget. The community pool subsidy is an increase of $87,000, which I'll touch on later in this presentation. Social Security changes are an increase of $84,000. And then all other changes, which I think is significant, because if you include that $616,000 that we're not going to have to budget for this year as a reserve fund transfer, the total is $694,000. So really, everything you see above are all the major drivers of the budget. Everything else is flat or actually down about $80,000. Moving on to the last few slides here, the mill rate impact of the proposed budget is a proposed mill rate of 35.12 mils. Now, I am confident that we're going to be able to get that significantly lower through our budget deliberations. But just to apply that against the current grand list values, the average home with 2 vehicles, at the current mill rate, which is 33.22 mils, it would be a tax bill of $7,677, again, including the 2 cars. And at the mill rate of 35.12, which again is a 1.9 mil increase, that would be $8,116, or an increase of $439 a year. Just to touch back on debt service, again, the town has had a long history of trying to bring down the general fund impact of our debt service. The town council has very judiciously been using debt service reserve funds and placing one-time windfalls, if you will, into the debt service reserve fund. And we've brought down, even though our overall cost, principal and interest is typically around $9 or $10 million, we've brought that number down to around $6 million, which I'll touch on the next page here, actually. Between $6.5 million and now about $7.3 million due to these offsetting reserves. So again, this is a chart the council's familiar with, a plan kind of dating back to fiscal 18. But as we plan for fiscal 22, you'll see some of these one-time reserve funds have now gone, including using the water treatment fund balance, some funds from CNR in fiscal 18 and 19, some energy rebates. This is the last year of funds that we had applied from the $1.5 million settlement with the state over the prison property. So as some of these offsetting reserves are no longer available, we are seeing increases year over year of our debt service just to pay for existing principal and interest. And you'll see this year, that's an increase of $340,000 over here. And again, next year, unless we have more deposits into our debt service reserve fund, we'll be facing some increases going forward of about $550,000 and an additional $800,000 over the next 2 years. So here, that just the same idea in graphical form. This is our budgeted net debt service and then the use of reserves that we've used in prior years, fiscal 18, 19, and 20, to kind of smooth the increase to the best that we can. But as those, again, start to run out, we're going to be facing additional pressures from our debt service, something that I know we've talked about for a couple of years now, and we're continuing to plan for. Just briefly on the community pool and the water treatment plant, the proposed pool budget is $1,020,853. This is an increase of $87,442. This is a 9.3% increase, and that's really due to we're anticipating closer to normal operations July 1st on, and hopefully certainly sooner than that. We have to restore the staffing and lifeguards that were cut from the assumptions in the current year budget. And so that's a large part of that increase. This would increase the town subsidy by the same amount to a total of $483,000, or an increase of 22% of the town subsidy, which comes in the Recreation Department's budget when we get through the budget detail. The water treatment plant's proposed budget is just over $4 million at $4,082,307. This is actually a decrease of $56,379. And this is really just due to a less budgeted use of fund balance compared with the prior year. And then again, I won't go through the detail of all of the capital budget proposals, but I will say that the capital plan, which again, in years past, prior to last year, were reviewed in the summer and approved by August 30th with a November referendum, something that's dictated by charter and certainly is available to the council on that timeframe. Obviously, school modernization is a major topic and certainly will be under consideration, I'm sure, at the council's pleasure into the spring and summer as we try to determine whether a project is going to go forward to November referendum. But before you tonight is a proposed capital budget, which I'm sure will be modified based on that proposal. This includes the 5-year plan for capital expenditures. And just a reminder, year one is the only one that we actually appropriate in the budget and approve the projects. The prioritization, again, just including projects that were previously on the previously adopted plan. Again, just showing the benefit of careful planning, and as projects move up from 4 and 5 years out up to 1 or 2 years, those projects are prioritized, but also new projects that might lead to future cost savings or returns on investment. And again, recommended projects that will not conflict with the future school modernization plan. The total requested was $92,233,000 by departments and the Board of Education. I did reduce this by $8.8 million for a total recommended of $83,418,000. This is nonetheless an increase of $15,959,000 over last year's total 5-year plan. So there are a lot of projects for us to go through and make some prioritization decisions. It's important to know that there are offsetting grants or available cash funding that total $10.6 million which reduces the net capital cost to $72,742,000. In the past, adopted 5-year plans, once we've fully vetted them through this process, typically gross $56 million for the full 5 years and net $48 million. And here's just an example of our prior years adopted plans, including also our first year actually appropriated plan projects, totaling this column here, averaging over the last 5 years about $9.3 million each year. And again, just quickly, the annual capital budget being proposed totals 15 million, sorry, that should say fiscal 22, $15,170,000, which is an increase of $9 million over last year's adopted capital budget. This includes $5.945 million that I've included as a request for phase 1 of the Bartlett South Development Project, 4.79 million of public works, sewer, and public properties projects, including mostly road and road reconstruction, and 2.65 million requested in the first year by the Board of Education for school projects. Finally, just a reminder, all of our budget documents are available on www.cheshirecT.org, where folks will find actually a very recently updated website, hopefully a little more user-friendly, with some nice features that we'll be happy to share and publicize in the coming days. And finally, just a reminder, next week, a week from tonight, is the budget hearing. And we are planning for a Zoom meeting. It'll be the same Zoom format that the council is used to, but we will be asking and making available an option that's known as Zoom webinar. Again, no different from the council's perspective, but we did use this at our Bartlett South engagement session, and it was quite successful, where folks actually have the ability to speak directly to the council, not their video, but their audio as they're called upon. But also people are more than welcome to submit their comments either through email or by calling and leaving message or anything like that. So certainly we want as much participation as we can at the public hearing, which again is scheduled for 6:30 next week, March 23rd. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it, I guess, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Sean, very much. Obviously, we've got a lot of work to do, a lot of information in these books, and looks like some large increases, but as you said, there's pockets of money we can use. Hopefully we'll use it judiciously, and I'm very confident the council will inevitably make the right decisions for our community. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our budget chair, Mr. Barr. I know, David, you've been working very hard in preparation of this day and starting this process off. So thank you for all your hard work. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Mayor Orris. I have to say the town manager and his staff, Arnett, Jim, Gina, and the others that have helped with this have done a super job in giving us the information we need, and reviewing over the next 7 budget sessions to review the various departments. Essentially, we're meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the most part, and SMC pretty much had Monday and Wednesday. So for those of you who are on both, thank you for your service to the town every night. But seriously, there are a lot of policy decisions and options that we need to look at. Sean put some of them on there in terms of revenue enhancement potentials, but we also have to decide whether we as a community want on the road to putting back services the way they were 2 years ago, or do we step it up more gradually? What efficiencies can we work with in departments, and some out of the box thinking that the mayor and the town manager talked about the other day when we were going over some of this. And so there's a lot of ideas and thoughts that we'd like to hear from the whole council and from the whole community. That's why we'll be having 2 public workshops, one next week, public hearing, and then early April, I believe it's the 8th. Yes, April 8th will be another one. These will primarily focus on the operating budgets. You know, we will hear the capital budgets as we review the departments, but the big capital items really will have to be reviewed again in light of the fact that the elephant in the room, SMC, hasn't been decided yet. So I think we would look at this more of an operating and maybe smaller capital item type workshops, but I think we do need to bring our thoughts and questions and ideas forward with regard to all the capital items as we're moving here. But again, capital budget will be reviewed again once we have all the numbers together in the later spring or summer, I would imagine. And it'll depend on the timing of getting the big number in there, if you will, the big project, because that will have a decision on cascading down the decisions of what items we think in totality we can afford as a community, and what we as a council would like to forward to the residents to have them support at referendum. So with that, I'm going to hand it over back to Sean, because we're going to at least try to review a couple of departments. Well, they're not really departments, but employee benefits, couple of budget areas, employee benefits, general services, and administrative and finance, which have minimal effect on capital budget. So they're really just operating items. And if we can go forward with that, I guess we'll start with employee benefits.
May I ask a question, Mr. Bowery?
Sure.
It's Tim. Yeah, this goes back to your presentation, Sean, and I may have dodged out of the room and not gotten it fully at that time. But when you brought up on your plate, your slide, the American Rescue Plan dollars, was that from the newest package that was just approved, or is that from the past one?
That's all from the newest package just approved. And there's a lot more, I think, detail to be fleshed out behind that, in part. Some of the expectations and the stipulations that are attached to those funds, how it's going to flow through to a town of our size, we understand is going to be similar to the CARES Act through the state for those towns that are under 50,000 in population, as opposed to direct grants from Treasury. As I mentioned before, I think the biggest one I'm curious about too is what's happening with this whole county funding, because it's a big number. And again, New Haven County exists more on paper than it does in any sort of practical operational capacity. But that's all from the funding that was just passed and signed. I was on a conference call with Senator Murphy's office on Friday as they were fleshing out for the towns some of the expectations as they understand them. Some of the rules will have to be defined by Treasury. And again, and what's important is the funds can't be used to offset long-term liabilities like pension costs or really targeted at offsetting tax decreases per se. Again, I know when everything's kind of funded in effect through taxes, that's something that will have to be kind of.
So basically,
devil's in
it's
the detail.
probably grant money to increase our spending, not to reduce our expenses.
Well, I think
Probably,
in
cynically
theory,
so, but
except as
probably.
you see some of their initial acceptable uses, it includes making up for lost revenue due to the pandemic, expenses due to the pandemic, things like that. So there's more to it, I think, that we're going to really need to get a little more clarity around some of the acceptable uses. And there's also the time horizon, right? The funds can be used over until I think it's over the next 4 years. And so I think that's another thing that we're going to have to kind of factor in. They don't want you to build in a cliff. They don't want you to build in one-time funds and then have to make it up the next year. But yes, in short answer, it is all related to the most recently passed legislation.
Okay. Thanks.
I do want to caution, because you bring up a good point about that we will certainly talk about those enhanced revenues that the town may receive. But I want to caution us that, I'm of a mind that, like the town manager said, we're hoping to reduce the 1.9 mil increase in here. And I think we will be able to do that substantially without really hurting services. We need to talk about that. I would not want to see us take all those revenues and say, oh, okay, this can take care of all that. That would be short-sighted. And I don't think that's what the council would want to do. But because there are public looking at this, I'd want us to be aware that if we get one-time revenues, they need to be thought of carefully rather than used all at once as mill rate reducers. There's a lot of opportunity for us to take some of that money from the COVID relief fund to recognize that many communities aren't like Cheshire that have revenues on a steady basis and have great collection rates. There are quite a few around the country that don't have that. And that's part of why this money was sent out to the communities to help them. We happen to be in a very good position in terms of collection. And as the town manager noted, in a good position in terms of employment, and are people better off? I think that survey from SMC had a lot of other benefits in my mind, besides just helping SMC decide what to do, because it showed that people are happy with what we have in town in terms of services that we offer and with the general town government. And I think we need to try to do what we can to keep services, but do it in an efficient manner and not taking these one-time revenues and using them imprudently and short-sightedly.
David, if I could just follow up on that, I'm glad you brought that up because that is something the council always wrestles with. And I think we've done a really good job of making sure we do not overuse these one-time revenue shots in the arm that we get to offset ongoing operating expenses. And I think that is even more so an issue for us this year with these pockets of funds coming in. We need to use the funds judiciously. We need to make sure that we're not creating a problem for future year operating budgets where we're digging ourselves a larger hole. So thank you for bringing that up. And it is something that we've all wrestled with over the years for many of us that have been involved in budgets in the past. And I think we've done a good job of balancing it, and I'm confident we'll do so again. Mr.
I had a follow-on to my
Okay,
own
Tim.
question, if I may. And it had to do, is there any other funding that's directed at education out of the newest plans? I had seen an article where Waterbury was going to be getting like $40 million and Cheshire was going to be getting $4 million. None of your numbers translate into 4 million. I don't know if the article was just a crazy off the wall article. It's a couple of days ago, or what. Is there anything separate for education that's not included in your numbers, Sean?
Yeah, so if I just quickly share my screen again, I think, and I don't know specifically the article that
It's in the Waterbury paper.
referencing, but the total, I have seen some of the initial estimates for what the schools were going to get, which they're doing based on Title I eligibility and distribution amounts, which is why you're seeing certainly the urban areas get significantly higher percentages. The total, I had seen a proposal that the initial calculations were that the Cheshire schools might get $1.1 million. But again, I'm pulling numbers off the recent report we got from CCM. If it was 1.1 million, that combined town and school for Cheshire
It's
would be
about $4 million.
So I would speculate that that's probably what that was in reference to.
Okay.
I have not seen additional school, any other money directed.
Well, that explains it, Sean. I didn't remember that slide in front of me, so that's good. Thanks.
But before we get to Mr. Veliver, but Tim, Sean and I talked about this. When I looked at the list of amounts various towns were going to be getting through this program, Cheshire seemed to be very low, particularly in comparison to communities maybe that are much smaller than us, et cetera. So I had asked Sean if he can make sure he figures out what is the criteria within which they're sending this money out to various communities, because the education side seemed very low to me for Cheshire, and it's something I think we need to look into. Mr. Veliver?
Yes, thank you. And Tim, you touched on one of the things I was going to raise, but my question is, and I assume that not because these are newer figures, but was the Board of Education budget, was there any, when they put their budget together, obviously, which was a while back, but was there any placeholder for an estimated funds like this? Did that budget talk about that at all? Or is this newer funds that they didn't even contemplate in their budget, which may now be, additional revenue for the Board of Education? So I'm guessing the question is, did they put an estimated placeholder in, or is this not something they even contemplated under their budget?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it would be something that certainly I'd want Vin or Jeff to probably answer directly, so I don't misspeak. But I will say that some of their budget assumptions did not include additional PPE and spacing requirements, other funds that they had anticipated they would receive offsetting grant funds for, but I think through the existing sources that we had already received. So their approved budget, we were looking at setting up something of a special revenue fund or something else to start accounting for some of these really one-time or 2-year funds 2-year expenditures, sorry, that are being offset by some of these, because a lot of these grants, the initial grants are reimbursable grants. So you kind of show the expenditures you have, and then you're applying for reimbursement. This federal money is really more like block grant money coming forward, and you're just going to be asked to certify, at least according to the senator's call that I was on last week, that not like a FEMA application, which is arduous, and there's a lot of other stuff. Of course, the devil's in the details. They say all this, and it'll still be arduous, as I'm sure Jim Jescott can attest to. But I believe they're trying to make this as seamless as possible, that you're just certifying that, yes, you're using the dollars for the following appropriate reasons. But yeah, but I don't know if that really answers your question, except that I know there are some assumptions that they made with respect to, again, some of the PPE, or possibly needing tents again, or some of those expenditures, the larger expenditures they've had this year. I think they're hopeful they're not going to need to. And that's another reason that they're kind of tracking them separately as a separate request.
Okay, thank you.
Before we move on, any other questions on the summary that Sean gave? One thing I'll add before we move on is that, Sean, you and I have talked about this as well, that while we're getting reimbursement for some of our COVID expenses, we have borne a larger percentage of some of these costs for the Chesapacot region, meaning the 3 towns that Chesapacot serves. And we were happy to do it. A lot of the vaccination and testing were done through our pool facility, and we provided not only public safety, but public works support to that, which was supporting really members of the 3-town area. And I want to make sure, Sean, that at some point Cheshire is being reimbursed for those costs on a pro rata basis by the other 2 communities that we serve. So I think at some point those numbers need to be brought into the mix as well. It may not be large, but it's certainly worth making sure the council's aware of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are having those conversations and tracking those expenses. And then further, as we talk about the budget, there is an increase request from Chesapacot that we received, understandably, a little late in the budget development process, but I did include in the budget. But their funding is a request of an increase of about $80,000 on the Cheshire share, which is substantial. That's about I don't know if I think it's like about a 30% increase. And so that's going to be another, now possibly that's a one-time, or that's a pandemic related increase. Maybe that's something that some of these funds can offset, understandably, with a public health crisis. But that's another example of additional funding we have due to the pandemic that we'll be discussing as we get into the public health budget.
Okay, you want to move into your department?
Sure. So I think, let me just pull up here. And maybe Jim, I know I've done a lot of talking here. Maybe Jim, this is a good time. Do you want to touch on some of the employee benefits items, or do you want me to take the medical discussion? I mean, I don't know if David,
I was going to say, if we look at employee benefits tonight, I thought it would be just a real high level look, because I know we're going to want to come back and look at pensions and health insurance in more detail as we get more information in the coming weeks. But we could certainly take a quick look at employee benefits for starts.
Okay. So do you want to weigh on that, Jim?
So I don't know if you want to, everybody wants to work off the books. I don't think we have any slides per se at this point.
I have a couple on medical insurance that I've updated, David, from what we showed the budget committee a couple of weeks ago. We could certainly, if you'd like, I can start with that, or otherwise we could go through the rest of the budget. Kind of one.
Oh, good. If you could do that, because that'll be a summary of what we talked about, and then you can move into
Sure.
that.
Okay. All right. So 1 second. Let me just pull this up. This should work here. All right. All right. I'm going to share this screen quickly on medical. It's going to be a lot of numbers here, but I'll walk it through. Okay. So let me just go back here. All right. So the issue that I want to make sure we kind of bring everyone up to speed on. And again, at the moment, it really affects the Board of Ed just a little greater degree than it does the town. But with respect to medical benefits, the town, again, is self-funded, self-insured, sort of, if you will. We pay Cigna to be our administrator of our insurance program, but all the claims, the actual dollars paying the claims, paying for the medical services, come out of the town's coffers, and we budget for that by through really the use of a reserve fund, and by budgeting on an annual basis what our expected claims are going to be. So if you'll see here in I guess column B, the expected claims, we budget for claims to be about $310,000 a month. And as the claims come in, obviously they spike, and sometimes you have good months and you have bad months. And we work very closely with our medical advisors, medical insurance advisors, to plan for annual increases, which ultimately are passed on and shared with the town employees at the co-share percentages that we've discussed before and negotiated. As you'll see, really just dating back to July, our first 3 months of this last fiscal year were worse than expected, certainly on average, but also just in aggregate. Significantly, August came in at $666,000 worth of claims versus expected. So after 3 months, we were already trending sort of very much in the wrong direction. Things kind of stabilized in October. You'll see here we had claims of $188,000, in November $238,000, $259,000, so all kind of below expected, kind of bringing us a little bit back on track. A blip in January as I was preparing this budget, and then we just got February's claims data last week, which was a much better month, and actually puts us overall not too far off of track. We're, as you see down here, hopefully you can see this cursor, but $77,218 variance, to the bad, so to speak, but not by a significant amount. The other factor, though, is as we plan our budget, and I referenced this earlier, we have built up a reserve fund. Let's skip past the Board of Ed for a second here. We've built up a reserve fund that basically accounts for, it's about 1.3, let me see here. Yeah, about $1.3 million. And as that equates to about 4 months, well, anywhere between 3 and 4 months, based on these different projections here, worth of claims. And historically, your advisors have encouraged towns to maintain at least 3 months worth of claims. Really, in the event, if you ever closed your insurance program or switched to a fully insured model, that would be an estimated amount that you might have to pay runout claims. But also for stability, the town has always carefully planned around that 2 to 3 month or 2 to 4 month amount as a buffer against a really bad claim year. If you have a good claim year, that obviously increases the fund balance. And as over the last 3 or 4 years, really, we've been budgeting about 250, maybe 200, and then maybe kind of as we try to finalize the budget, maybe add another 50,000 of assumed fund balance usage in the actual budget that we adopt. If you'll see here for the town side, currently with this more recent information, we're actually kind of back on track to about 3.5 months worth of fund balance at the end of the year. If we have expected either, you'll see here, our worst year, which was actually 2020, for the remaining months, or the dollar average of the prior 3 years, that's what this reflects here. If that occurs for March, April, May, and June, we'd end up again somewhere between 3.5 and 4 months. For what we're projecting here is 3.7 months worth of fund balance. So again, there actually may be a little bit more with this recent information, may have some budget flexibility with what we budgeted, because again, 2 months ago, it was looking a lot more dire. And again, with respect to the Board of Ed, they've been kind of using a much greater kind of percentage of their fund balance and their budget planning over the last couple of years. And so that's really what's driving, when they've had the bad claim year, and they've had a very bad claim year, you'll see in their budget presentation that, again, about 50% of their budget increase is due to their current projections have them almost depleting the fund by the end of the year and needing to restore that fund balance. So more to come there. I know it's a lot for those folks that haven't kind of been deeply involved in it, but oh yeah, I see Don there.
Yeah, Sean, sorry. I just had a quick question. 'Cause, I mean, from what I have heard, many of large corporations to self-insure, I mean, last year was an anomaly. Their costs were way down on that. But what I fear, because you look at ours, I think January on, we had a pretty low, put a spike in things.
Hey, Don, I don't mean to interrupt you, but some of us are laughing because you're going in and out. We can't really follow what you're saying.
Almost have it.
Or is there?
Not here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right, yeah, I almost have the question, but it's
Your
like I
video
get,
off.
Yeah,
Don.
sorry. I don't know if your internet is, if you can enhance
Yeah.
it somehow, but you're breaking up and.
All right.
long
That's
drawn out.
better.
yeah, that's
All right.
better.
So, all right. So, I mean, I've talked and I've read where many corporations who self-insure, their costs were down last year, and when they're down, because of COVID and everything, a lot of elected surgeries were put off. My fear is that could we see a spike this year in those costs where we may be underfunding because there might be a spike in a lot of these elective surgeries that were put off.
Yeah, that was one of our initial assumptions, although I have to say, and we worked with our benefits consultant, in some ways Cheshire was sort of not the norm with respect to, we saw, first of all, we were lucky, knock on wood, we did not have significant COVID related claims. So, hospitalizations and ventilations and all the things that can lead to huge claims. And of course we are funded with stop loss. We have a stop loss insurance program in place to prevent against, kind of hedge against the really, really large claims. But no, I think your point is well taken, and we've been monitoring it. I will say, some of the things that have come up, have really been more, and again, on the Board of Ed side, kind of speaking for Vin, some of the joint and the, I don't know if it's, not repetitive motion so much, but possibly a result of people not being maybe as active as they were prior. That was one of the things we were looking at. We haven't seen from kind of elective surgeries really a significant change. But, I think certainly that's a concern, is that things would be held off. I mean, I do think part of why we see the favorable January and February numbers, if you saw that chart before, we kind of just plug a expected number divided by 12 for the whole year. Our HSA, which most of our employees are on a high deductible health plan, that resets in January. So a lot of people are paying their own claims, if you will, or paying their larger percentage before they hit their deductible January, February, and March. So I think that really also speaks to why we're seeing the more favorable numbers. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly something that with elective surgeries being deferred, it's something to keep an eye out. But we certainly know some of our larger claims have been not so much elective surgeries, but just required kind of things that have cropped up every couple of years.
Peter?
Sean, on the slide you brought up, showing the towns, June of 2020, was like 1.2 million for claims.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean,
Yeah.
some 4 times what we, set for. What, can you speak a little bit to what happened in June, or?
Sure. A lot of that, and keep in mind, so that was driven off of a couple of claims, but one very, very large claim that ultimately ended up in somebody passing away. But ultimately, what happens is that will come back to us in the form of stop loss revenue.
I was
and it
going to
gets
say,
offset
yeah.
in the future years. Future months. And so there was a little bit of an issue with timing because some of that resets July 1st. So there was a little that carried forward into the next year. But we didn't, ultimately of that million, we did not pay net nearly that amount because we received, back into the trust fund, a significant amount of reimbursement revenue from stop loss. Yeah.
Okay. No, I saw that as you were going by and it just,
Well, and that's one of the reasons we're a little more confident. If you know, we traditionally have some of our projected scenarios for the next 4 months or the remaining months of the fiscal year. One of them is the worst year, kind of what would happen the worst year. That's why fiscal 20 is our worst year. And I, again, knock on wood, you're never certain, but I'm relatively confident that if we have a more normal year, it will look like the average years, if you will. And we'll end up with closer to 3.5 or 4 months of fund balance. Which again, I think provides some opportunity if the council's looking for some reduction. Again, I wouldn't maybe necessarily go all the way back to the 250,000 we've used in every other budget year. But again, I budgeted 0 assumption that we draw down on that. So I think there's some room there, as I know we'll be looking for places to find pockets of possible expenditure cuts.
All right. Did you have more presentation?
I think that probably covers medical insurance for now. And again, I'm sure when the Board of Ed's here, they'll go deep into their own situation. But maybe with that, Jim, do you want to take over some of the stuff I know you have?
Yeah, I don't know if while we're on employee benefits, I did have a chart on heart and hypertension. I don't know if that's something we might want to just take a quick look at.
That changed at the last minute at the end of last fiscal year. And
Right.
I guess you've got a change in this year as well, but
I just thought I'd show you the history. If
Yep.
I don't know if Sean, that's something, it was in the folder for tonight's meeting.
Yep, I'll put it up right now.
So I just thought that this would provide a little history. This is a reserve fund of sorts that will cover, future liabilities for our heart and hypertension. And you can see that this is our cash balance over the years. We did have over $1 million in there at one point, but we struggled in the last decade because we had a large claim that continued to eat away at this cash balance. And even with our healthy funding from the general fund contributions. But you could see that based on the recommended budget, and I hope I didn't get the wrong number in there. In the detailed budget book, we're looking at page 54. And I do have, apparently, Sean, you have 150,000 budgeted for this year. I assumed 100, so it's going to be 50,000 higher than that 87,000. But I just wanted to, at least demonstrate that we're kind of at the bottom here as far as reserves. And this, like the medical trust fund, like our capital non-recurring fund, all these things, when we go to the rating agencies, this is in addition to the debt service reserve fund, and our fund balance kind of gives us a little cushion if we need to fall back on some of our reserves. Going forward, and since Sean budgeted the 150,000, that is what is projected for our claims this coming year. So, going forward, I think we're kind of at least hoping to stay even, but it'd be nice if we could build this fund back up over time, because you never know if another one of the people that were involved in this, take a turn for the worse. It could end up being a bigger liability in the short term at some point.
Questions on that?
And that's about all I have on that. I just want to say on pensions, we're waiting for our July 1, 2020 valuation, which I understand that they're hoping to have that before the end of March. And I'm kind of waiting on that. I'm hoping that has some more favorable results. And if you recall, and as Sean mentioned earlier in his presentation, last year we did decide to do a 2-year phase-in where we are utilizing now more conservative assumptions for evaluations. We reduced our rate of return from 7.5% to 7%, and we used more conservative mortality tables. But we did that over a 2-year phase-in period. But with this valuation, it is potential that our experience hopefully will be favorable, and maybe there will be some adjustments there that we can bring forward. On that note, even though we used a 2-year phase-in, both our fire plan and our police pension plan, we were able to pay 100% of our actuarially recommended contribution. So those have already been phased in. It's just the town plan that's being spread out over 2 years as far as the actuarially recommended contribution.
And what's the timeline for projection to get that up to 100%, 100%?
So it would be with this 2022
This budget does.
contribution.
Okay.
And we've built that into this, Sean did build this into the budget. So my hope is with the valuation, though, that if our experiences is more favorable, which often it is because the actuaries are generally a little bit on the conservative side. So I'm hoping that, maybe we'll be able to scale back some of those contributions.
The other important factor, and I think we mentioned this before, David, but it's evaluation as of July 1, which doesn't encapsulate all of the more favorable market returns that we experienced in the markets after July 1st. So there were some certainly, but that's always a frustrating thing with this is you're encouraged by favorable markets, and that your pension funds are doing much better as you see them in the fund accounts when you look at the balances online. But for valuation purposes, they go back in time feels like almost a year ago. You don't really get that full credit.
Yeah, because it was up over 9% for calendar year 2020. It was a good number, and but a significant portion of that was the second half of the year. So it's not going to necessarily be reflected in what the actuary tells us our contribution has to be. I guess my question really though, Jim, was how many years until we're fully funded, not making the contribution, how many years till we're fully funded? Are we doing it on the 20-year payout for that? Or
they did spread out the amortization last year to help mitigate the increase in our annual contributions. So I think they pushed it back out to Sean, if I remember, 25 years. It's it's spread out as far as we can.
So there's one possibility if the numbers come in better that we can split that a little bit, maybe some rate relief, possibly expense relief.
Yeah, and I can honestly say our pension funds have done very well this past year. As you know, you've been at most of the retirement board meetings. I think they've hit some all-time highs, and that will certainly have an impact on this coming valuation as well.
All right.
Yeah, and I would just point out, last year in the detail book on page 57, I did break out kind of for this reason, and that's why you see a little in the far right column, again, page 57, the actual, the town used to always budget this as one number, $3.2 million, if you see in the actuals. The detail would have some of the other numbers, but I like to be able to compare year over year town pension contributions, police, but also really the 457 and the 401A plans, because we're really in that part, despite the fact that we have closed pension plans. We're in that kind of that unenviable time frame where you're still paying, as we are, increased legacy pension costs because we're trying to get to fully funded. But every new hire that comes on, while they don't increase our pension liability, they come with a percentage of their pay we have to budget in 401k or 401a funds. So we're in that time frame when both are increasing. And hopefully we're really finally to that point with the defined pension plan, where that should theoretically, with good market returns and a lower assumption now, start to level a little. But if you see on page 57, it's no longer a small portion of the budget. The town 457 contribution is $280,000, and the 401A for the police is 122. So, there's $400,000 there that didn't exist when we had the former pensions, and now also those pensions, even though they're closed, are costing us a couple $1 million more than they used to, 10 years ago. So it's kind of a twofer. And long run, it's again a good thing, and we'll be in a great spot years from now. But right now, we're kind of bearing both of those, if that makes sense.
Are there other pension questions? That's the last part of employee benefits, right?
Yeah, but most of the other line items, Social Security, for example, or based on wages, so there's not a lot of wiggle room there as to what you can do. Unemployment compensation, we just project out, based on historical trends. I will say, obviously, last year with COVID, there was a huge spike in our unemployment costs amongst all our budgetary funds. But fortunately, we were reimbursed 50% by one of the COVID-19 grants. And so that did mitigate that a little bit. Other than that, I really don't have a lot to comment on at this point on employee benefits.
I'm gonna ask everybody if we have more questions on that, but since it's getting near 9 o'clock and we didn't want to really tire ourselves out at the very first of our 7 sessions on this, if maybe we can finish with the questions we might have in this area, but maybe call it a night and then move for the couple of items we left off tonight onto next week's meeting. And is that okay with everybody? Good.
Yes.
Everybody's saying yes. That's good. All right. Are there other questions regarding the employee benefits then, so we can wrap up this part? I don't see any hands, and I do see all the photos of everybody here. So, all right, Mr. Chairman, Mayor Orris, I'll hand it back to you. Then I think we're ready to adjourn, if that's all right with you.
Well, we have one other item of executive session on the agenda, but yes, thank you to everyone who presented and spoke on the budget. I know we've got a lot of work. I'm very confident in this group. We've got a couple of new people, which I know are going to add a lot of value, and a number of seasoned individuals who I've stood side by side with for many years working on these budgets. And I can tell the community that it is always a very collaborative process that this council goes through. So rest assured, all 9 of us are going to have a meaningful seat at this table. We're going to work hard to find places to save money on your behalf while continuing to fund the services that you expect from us. We do put a lot of time into this, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to that over the next number of weeks. So thank you, David and Sean and Jim, and I see Gina here and Arnett. Thank you all for your hard work. I know, Jim, your department, you and Gina, and all of your staff are just working around the clock these days to put all this information together for us. I will tell you, I think we have one of the most professional staffs in Cheshire. We're probably a bit biased when we say that, but the reality is you guys continually just show what great people you are and the professionals that you are in your respective fields. So I think we've got great leadership, and it makes our job a lot easier when we get to this point. So thank you all for everything you do. With that, we're going to go to a personnel matter executive session. I don't think we're going to be including anybody, Sean, other than the town council. We're going to need someone, obviously, to manage this meeting for us from the outside, I guess. Are you or Arnett going to do that?
Yeah, I can just leave it open and active. So I think once we have Mike sign off, we can figure that out.
Great. Thank you to everybody for participating tonight. So can I get a motion to go into executive session for personnel matters? Thank you, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Seconded, Mr. Talbot, I think. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passed unanimously. So just let us know when we're in executive